Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Industry Perspectives. I'm your host, Ainsley Bowden, and today I have the distinct pleasure of sitting down with Stephen Danton, who is the co-owner of 2 Ton Studios, the developers and creators of Unto the End. Now, Steve has a very interesting history, having worked at Microsoft in various roles, leaving the company with his wife to produce a video game, Unto the End, coding that, developing it over a period of 4 years, launching it on Xbox Game Pass, Stadia. And so we talk about all things gaming industry, game design, coding and development, what people don't understand about the industry, what it was like to launch a game with Xbox and on Game Pass, and a lot more. I hope you enjoy it. And we are live with Stephen Danton of 2 Ton Studios. Morning, sir. How you doing?
Good, good. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. It's freezing rain outside.
Beautiful.
What's that?
I said beautiful. Yes.
Yeah, but nice and warm inside. So really happy to be chatting with you rather than walking out in the freezing rain.
I hope so. I hope this is better than that. We'll see. But yes, December 15th as we record this. I've got my happy Halo Days Christmas sweater on.
Yeah,
and nice. Get all of us getting ready for the the holiday season, which is nice. But been looking forward to this one, man. We were just chatting prior to going live here that Steve and I actually met through the Sega roundtable that we did with Cog and some of the others in the industry, Mike, and great reflection on what Sega meant to us growing up. But I think the conversation for you and I is going to kind of be around that, right? Getting into gaming, working at Microsoft, and then obviously setting up your own studio and developing your own game with your wife as well. So really looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. Me too. Yeah. Again, thanks for having me on. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Cool. Of course. So I think, as always, I do on these, I love to hear how people got into gaming. I think everyone's kind of journey into discovering games is fun, and hearing kind of what got them addicted to the hobby, the art form, whatever you want to refer to it as. So take us back, if you will, to, kind of that first time you experienced a video game and kind of when it first kind of set into you that this was something that you were going to really be kind of passionate about.
Yeah, for sure. I can remember it pretty clearly. My mom went to a flea market and brought home a TI 99 or Texas Instruments 99, which was like kind of like a ColecoVision, but it had like a keyboard and it it had like kind of the Atari sticks and stuff. And it had all these like rip-off games, right? Like it had like a kind of a clone of Pac-Man where you weren't like grabbing little pills. Instead, you were like collecting a chain. It had like a mountain climbing game that was like a clone of like Alpinist or Alpiner or whatever the old Atari game was. And I was like amazed by it. It was just this like super engrossing, immersive experience where I think I was like 8 years old, maybe. My mind just kind of exploded because it was like, oh, this is just like such a fun thing to do. It's challenging. Like I grew up playing a lot of sports. So I like that aspect of it. But then it's just kind of like, it's kind of like TV, but it's like interactive TV, to my small mind. Right. And that was just amazing. And my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, Greg, he's also in the industry. And so that was really good, growing up with him, and he loves games and we would always play his games together and stuff. So that I think made it even more enjoyable, right? You could kind of share it with your sibling, and then as you get older, friends and stuff like that. So, but yeah, that was my first experience with gaming. I remember my mom is still terrible at games, but she she was always very curious about these things. And so I remember we were playing the Pac-Man clone, and she was useless at it. But one time I got her to play, and what I did was I gave her a controller that was unplugged. And I was playing the plugged-in controller like behind her back.
Right.
She was like doing so well, right? She was like so happy and so amazed that she was doing so well, but really I was playing. And then later I told her, and she was laughing and stuff. But the joy that games can give you, as a person,
sure.
That feeling of accomplishment and overcoming challenges and kind of the mystery of understanding a game and stuff like that. That really made me fall in love with it. So
yeah, that's an awesome story. And I think it's neat to reflect on those stories from kind of when we were growing up, when games were really kind of first kind of coming about, because I think, I look at someone like my youngest son now, who has his entire life seen video games. I mean, when he was a baby, it was the 360 generation. So you're already well advanced, and they're just second nature to him. But I think like when we were kids and we first experienced them, it was it was kind of revolutionary in the sense there was nothing else like it. The way you said it, where it was like, it's like TV, but you actually get to do stuff, or,
Yeah.
you know, it's interactive. Like, it was mind blowing at the time. And I think that sadly, and it's no fault of their own, of course, but it feels like that's lost nowadays. Like, games are so prevalent in the community and in just the culture that, you know, I don't know if they have that same experience that we did when you were used to seeing TV or hearing the radio, but now it was like this was this new form of entertainment.
Yeah, I guess the closest thing to that now would be VR and stuff, which I haven't spent a lot of time getting into. But, you know, to your point, I think it's an interesting one where I'd be interested to know if you feel this way too. But I used to feel that when I get a new game, my mindset was, okay, I'm going to learn how to play this.
Absolutely.
Right? And it wasn't. Now I feel the mindset is more, I want the game to teach me how to play, and then I'll see if I get any joy out of it, you know? And that's such a different model, both as a creator and as a player, right? And I kind of miss the days where, you know, you're a little uncertain and you're kind of stumbling around in the dark, so to speak. And then you kind of put it all together and you're like, I'm smart. I figured that out. And you talk to your buddies about stuff. Like, that to me was one of the big joys of gaming. So, yeah.
That I have a smile and I'm stumbling over words right now, because that is so core to conversations I've had lately about games like Elden Ring,
right?
About games like even a recent example is Callisto Protocol, of all things, which I reviewed 2 weeks ago.
Right.
It doesn't have a standard combat system like a lock on where you dodge a B and then you roll. Like, games are becoming standardized, which is good in some ways. But to your point, anytime I approach a new game, even today, I turn it on and say, okay, let's figure out how it works, right? Like, what is the developer providing to me, the player, the tool sets to figure out this game world? And I want to discover that on my own. And I think one of my recent annoyances with games is exactly what you said, is that they they treat players, and I don't mean this as harshly as it may sound, but they treat players like they're stupid. They don't give you a chance to learn. They don't give you a chance to figure anything out. It's just like, the buttons are the same as every game, you know. And by the way, every 5 steps, someone's going to tell you what you should be doing. And it's like, that is so boring to me. It takes away from the art form of what games used to be.
Right.
In my opinion. Agree.
Yeah. And as a creator, you know, we did that a lot with Under the End, right? We really said, like, look, it's handhold free. You're on your own.
Yeah, I loved it.
Super hard to teach you, right? But not through traditional means, like not through, I guess, more modern means. We use more traditional approaches, right? Like, I remember the old sequelitis video, which was about Mega Man. And you've probably seen it, where, like, he's talking about how, you know, modern games pop up these things like, you know, watch out, Mega Man, there's a pit you're going to fall in, right? And then, you know, sequelitis is like, or you can just, like, show things falling into the pit. And then Mega Man, as the player, knows, like, stuff falls in there. And then you won't fall in there. Or, like, you know, he talks about how they did their wall jump. Like, you jump on the wall and Mega Man, it's like foot kind of sticks on the wall and slides down. So then you have time, and you can notice the animation, and the player will, like, press the jump button again. And now you learn to wall jump, rather than, like, pausing the game and having a illustration pop up that says, like, you can wall jump and all this stuff. And to me, like, in Unto, definitely, like, it's hard to teach that stuff. You have to kind of do it you have to lock people in situations, but you don't want to make it seem too obvious. And it was very interesting getting the spectrum of feedback from people, mostly by way of, like, watching people play on Twitch, where you can tell the players who kind of grew up a little bit more in our generation, who just, like, get it like that. And then there's other ones who are, like, frozen, like they're paralyzed in fear because the game hasn't told them what to do. And it was actually, I would say about it's like 25% of people are in that frozen kind of bucket.
Okay.
And it was amazing to me to, like, experience that as a creator, because you know, it's like everything's there for them. They just aren't. It's like they've convinced themselves that unless the game teaches them something, it can't be done. You know, where our kind of approach is more like, okay, I'll figure it out. Almost like test it a bit. Like, you see gamers they'll jump and they'll roll and they'll kind of play around with the controls for a bit, and they'll get familiar, and then they'll play the game.
Exactly.
Some players, like, they just walk, and unless someone tells them to do something, they won't. And so it's very different. It's interesting.
I love it. I love this conversation because I felt like that more than ever, like, recently. And if I think back, you know, I go really well back. One of the first games I experienced, the first ever actually on PC, was King's Quest, the original. Right. And that game, you want to talk about obtuse.
Yeah.
Not only did you have no idea where to go or what to do, but you had to type in and figure out what to type specifically
Yeah.
so that it would work. And I adore it. It's still one of the games to this day that I look back on as one of my favorites of all time.
Yeah.
And I just, as to your point, as soon as I play a game, I love just going in, exploring and figuring out what to do and learning what not to do. Right. I think that's a big part of games is, to your point, like with the hole with Mega Man, it was like, okay, is there something down there?
Right.
And you fall, you die,
Yeah.
and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
I won't
Now
do
you have
that
more
anymore.
knowledge. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is part of the experience to me. And I think when these modern games take that away, it actually detracts, at least for me, from the overall experience of the game for sure.
Yeah. So you know, and to that point, I don't play that many AAA games anymore, right? And it's not because they're not well crafted, and it's not because they don't have beautiful graphics and interesting worlds to explore, but it's that they, as to you, to what you said, it's like they do become a little formulaic, right? It's like God of War, the new God of War, right? You know, they have the kind of like controversial assistance system.
Oh,
right?
it killed me. It ruined my enjoyment of that game.
And it's like, so why did they have that? Well, it's like, there's all sorts of good reasons for economics, and like you can't have people bounce off the game and stuff like that. But like a more fundamental question is like, were the puzzles designed well enough, right? And if they aren't designed well enough, like you actually have to have them. But you kind of do, because there's this checklist as a AAA game. You must have this. You must have like a quest log. You must have a map. You must have puzzles. You must have fighting sections. And that's a way to make games, but I don't know if it's the best way to make games. And I don't know. I worry about that as a approach. Not to totally like sidetrack the conversation, but I worry about that as good relative to like AI. And not that AI won't generate great games. I think AI generated games could be amazing, if not better, than the games that are out there. But for all the people that are putting a lot of time and energy into AAA titles, the more formulaic they get, the easier it is for a computer to follow that formula and then just dial it left and right to give, the Ains experience versus the Steven experience versus the, Bob experience, etc. And then, I think you're going to find a lot of people that were working in the industry, maybe no longer working in the industry, which would be, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. But for those people, it won't be great, and that would be sad, I think. So.
Yeah, it's interesting perspective. And I completely agree with you. I think that, there's a lot I could say there. I think it is frustrating for me, especially as someone who I play everything. And of course I cover everything. Right. And I find that when you try to have conversations, I would say less and less nowadays, when you have this type of conversation with people, there's a lot of people who just don't get it. Right. Like they don't have the perspective of what we're talking about to be able to relate to what I'm saying or pointing out. And I don't say that to mean necessarily that I'm right and they're wrong, but just perspective, right? Like understanding a viewpoint of how X, Y, and Z could have been different in a game and therefore better, or, better to me per se. I think your comment around, if you have to tell someone how to solve the puzzle, is the puzzle well designed, or should it even be there to begin with? That's literally, and I've had several podcast discussions now about God of War Ragnarok specifically, basically posing that question. Is you have a lot of filler in that game where you're climbing or you're doing puzzles or just meaningless meandering. Right. And it's like, why is this here? Why am I doing this? Right. Like there's no point for me to be doing this right now. Yeah. And it just doesn't fit. And it just seems, not to pick on God of War by any chance. No. It's certainly not alone, but it just, I think you bring up a great point about the way games are designed today. Some games are designed today, especially in the AAA space versus the smaller space, where I think one of the things I love about the indie space, and obviously we're going to talk more about this, is just the creativity and the, I would say, willingness to experiment a little more, say, than the AAA space.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, look, I mean, if you and I got, someone backed up a truck, $100 million truck of money, it's like, okay, go make a game, but you got to get this return on it. And these people are going to be watching over your shoulder. It's not easy, right? It's, of course, and it's not to take anything away from those guys. They work really hard. They're super talented folks. But it is very much a business, and they have to maximize their revenue, and they can't afford to have anyone bounce off it. That sucks. It's like, I was thinking before jumping on, like, I don't think we've yet seen like the Blade Runner of AAA games. You
Mm.
know, where it's like sure, there's always indie stuff in any genre, right? There's indie music, there's indie movies, there's
Yep.
indie performing arts, et cetera, et cetera. But the great art forms, the ones that are kind of ubiquitous, but have kind of they can capture the kind of the feeling of indie without being low budget. Movies have done that. Music has definitely done that. I think games aspire to that, but to me, they haven't reached that level. They haven't. Like Blade Runner is a good example of a movie to me that is pretty hard hitting. Like it doesn't explain the ending, and it's got like it's pretty vague in parts, and it's very atmospheric, and the main character doesn't really say much, and like that's pretty daring, right, for a movie to do that. And that you don't see very often. I can't think of an example of that in the AAA space. But there are some really, I would call them AAA indies that I think do a good job of that. Like Aberdeen is really good. I think Inscription's really good. I think Faster and Light is really good, and I think those games are very daring games in that they do things differently than maybe the mainstream. The Witness, I think, does a good job of that. Personally, I like Below a lot. I think Rain World does a good job of that. And I want to see a couple AAA games kind of take that risk of like really like I always joke, I've said this to Cog before, I want to see like the 4-hour God of War that's like that's just Kratos chasing a troll for 4 hours. It's like super immersive, and it's like got lots of nuance and detail, and Kratos really has to like overcome these challenges, and he has to survive, and the troll has things you can track, and like it's really like they really went all in on that thing. And you can die, and it's brutal, and but you don't see that, right? And there's good reasons you don't see that, but I want to see more of those kind of things where people really take those risks. So hopefully
yeah, and I think you said it well, right? Which is the sad reality is at the end of the day, it is a business, and you don't have people investing the tens of millions of dollars it takes to create a AAA experience today, where there's a high chance of risk that you won't see the return on that. There's just that's the problem, right? That's the crux of the situation, which is probably exactly why we see a lot more experimentation and kind of creativity or uniqueness in the indie space, because the risk is far lower. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And I kind of feel it's like, as an indie dev, I feel it's like my job to do risky things, right?
Yeah.
I will say though that increasingly, definitely with Unto, you run across enough players. I think there's been a shift in the last 10 years where I think there used to be a little bit more, hey, this is an indie game, I'm going to play it as an indie game. But now it's a little more, you're getting more mainstream folks. And maybe that's like the influence of Game Pass, for example, where you're kind of getting the Xbox audience rather than just the Steam audience, which I think is a little bit demographically different. And so you get the expectation that this has like AAA kind of behaviors and sentiment and kind of mechanics and approaches to guidance and stuff like that. And then when they don't get it, they kind of, I've seen the reaction like, well, this is poorly designed because it doesn't follow the formula, quote unquote. And I think that's unfortunate. I hope that doesn't get worse, because then I think you'll see a lot of indies get squeezed out too. And indies will be really forced to kind of follow the formula as well to be successful, which I don't want to have, right? Like I loved in Faster and Light where you're playing and like, someone attacks and then I don't know if you played that game, but like a compartment catches on fire and you're like, what the heck happens? And you have like your whole ship burns down and you're dead. And then you're like, okay, wait a second. Like, what can I do there? Oh, if I open the doors and I vent to space, then it sucks all the oxygen out of it and suffocates the fire. Okay, so now I know how to do that. And then I do it the next time and I don't succumb to that thing again. But there's other things that happen. And it doesn't teach you any of this. It's all like trial and error. You learn. It's a roguelite in the sense that, you're learning. It's not like giving you more powers and cool things. It really is like you're getting the experience points, kind of, to use like a Dark Souls analogy. And I loved it because you feel like you're becoming a better space captain, right? And so it's that to me is great, and it would be a worse game if they tutorialized the heck out of it and had you play an hour of teaching you things. So
yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I think we talk a lot. You mentioned Game Pass there, and I know a lot of us talk about the accessibility to just get more people trying games, right, and playing games, and obviously we'll touch on that with them too. But I gotta admit that the perspective you just gave is interesting. I don't think I've thought about it that way, as a potential negative of future kind of game design or impacting how people approach their games that are releasing on such a service. So interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I don't. Who knows where it's going to go, right? I mean, I hear increasingly though people saying, kind of what the conversation around God of War Ragnarok around the assist system.
Yeah.
I heard enough people saying, that's frustrating. We should be able to turn it off. Maybe they shouldn't have these puzzles. More so than I maybe heard 5 years ago. And so maybe there is kind of a sea change happening where more and more people will expect that. It's okay to not hold my hand. And ultimately, I mean, the great thing about the free market is that if people want something and they're willing to pay for it, then you'll get more of that, right? And I think you see that in like Elden Ring and the success of Elden Ring.
Love it.
But wow, is it hard to build an Elden Ring, right? And it takes a lot to build an Elden Ring, and so to be honest, like we talked about earlier, like what got me excited about gaming, and the TI 99, like what convinced me that maybe I could do something in gaming is Dark Souls. Like when that came out, I was kind of like not into gaming that much anymore. I'd kind of like, well, it's not for me, and it's like it's becoming too commercial, and the only way I could contribute is if like I joined a big studio and stuff like that. And then Dark Souls came out. Well, I actually played Dark Souls 2 was the first game I played, and so I was a little late to the party. But playing that is like, wow, these guys they're not joking around here. Like they just put you in this world, and they give you a couple tips like how to swing a sword and stuff, but that's about it. And then it's up to you, and I struggled. I remember Dark Souls 2. I went the way where you fight the big knights and like the green kind of a rusty armor kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
I must have died to one guy like for 4 hours. I was like, this game's impossible. It's like, how does anyone beat this thing? And then like a light bulb goes off, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Like I can strafe, and if I time my things, I can do this. But it's so different than how all the other games you play up to that point, at least for me, that it's like it's hard to kind of make that transition. And then once you do, it's like now I can't play any other game that's like a Dark Souls, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's amazing. I'm glad that Dark Souls did that for you, because I too came into Dark Souls a little late. I remember I actually picked up Demon Souls on PS3 when it launched. I played it briefly, got my butt kicked. And I didn't go back to it at the time. And then Dark Souls released, and it started getting all the, praise and reviews and everything came out about it. And I got in a little late as well. But when I played it, exact same experience. It's like, what am I doing? Where am I? And I think by that point in my gaming history through the past few generations, we had evolved to where gaming, to your point, had gotten to a formula, and Dark Souls kind of reset that. Right. And then as I really got into Dark Souls, that was it, and the Bloodborns and everything, in that space. And when Elden Ring hit this year, which I've preached about way too many times this year, but, you get in and you walk out of that first dungeon and you see the world in front of you. And it's just like, okay, go.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It's
the truest sense of
incredible. Yeah, it's incredible. And I was fortunate enough to get that early and review it. And as I'm playing it, I was talking to Miles over at Windows Central because he got it too, and we were DMing about it. And as we got further and further, we just kept yelling superlatives at each other about how, it just gets bigger and better, right, as you go. And, we started to have that conversation like, am I crazy, or is this like literally one of the greatest games of all time? Like, this is just, we never expected it to be as good as it was. And agree. I think the reason I bring that up is after I finished Elden Ring and it released and I played it again, and I've had hundreds and hundreds of hours into it now, but it literally ruined gaming for me for months this year. Like I try to play something else, and I'm like, this is just boring. Like it doesn't give the same experience, And I went back to a lot of indies and started playing different games, and it's just a vastly different experience. But I think to counter ourselves from the point we made a bit ago, the good news is that Dark Souls and the From games have thrived, and maybe that is a positive message for other developers to say, hey, maybe we do need to stop just holding your hand every second of the way and create something a little more, maybe not obtuse, but more where let the player have some agency in how they play our game.
Yeah, I think so. Like the way I like to think about it is I want to play a game that's confident enough in its own systems that it lets me fail or struggle, because it believes in itself enough, and it's been kind of play tested enough that most people will eventually get it if they give it a try, right? And I really respect that about games. Circling back to our kind of little commentary on AI, my hope when I'm optimistic, and I think it doesn't really do you any good to be pessimistic about these things. So optimistically, I think what AI could do is it could help us in the industry, but definitely AAA games take more risks in terms of things, because I think it may allow AAA studios to spend more time iterating and creating kind of content that may not be seen, right? And that may allow more agency to kind of go and explore things and do things that are a little bit unguided. And so for folks like you and I, we might be able to play the game in a way that better suits us without having to dial certain things and settings or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the studios won't have to take these huge risks of building things that people might bounce off of, because AI could generate these things, or, you know, AI could help curate these things and kind of refine them and stuff like that. So that's my hope for AI, that it kind of shifts the workflow so that creators can spend more time iterating and trying out ideas and less time fabricating and kind of manufacturing things. And that could be a great boon for games across the board. So
yeah, that's interesting. I've seen more and more developers like yourself commenting here and there on AI and what AI can do, and the capabilities or possibilities, I guess a better word, of what it could do. And it's, yeah, I like your positive outlook there. And if we know what little I know about actual game development, and obviously you can correct me if I say something stupid here, but you know, it is so complex, and there's so many factors to it, and there's so many things that can happen. And if that games, especially big budget games, as we know, take a very long time and a lot of people to produce nowadays. And if AI, from a positive aspect, can simplify some of those processes, which allow the creativity to come from the human side, and the standardized processes to come from the AI side, and therefore merge that together somehow, that would be excellent.
Yeah. You know, we'll see. I was kind of thinking about this. It's like, so a couple of years ago, it was like self-driving cars are going to take over the world. Everyone's going to, no one's going to be allowed to drive anymore. You know, like it's going to be illegal to drive a car. And like, you know, I don't really see that happening. Not maybe it will eventually, but I don't see it. I think they were originally predicting like 2030 in California, like no one will be able to drive on a highway, you know, unless it's a self-driving
You're exactly
car.
right. I work in that space, so you're exactly right. That's that was a real discussion.
Yeah, so maybe that, you know, it'd be great if that. Well, I don't know if it'd be great. It'd be interesting if it happens. Let's be positive and say it'll be great. But you know, there's a lot of stuff to solve there, right? A lot of infrastructure challenges, like people have to maybe refit their car, whatever. And then before that was like 3D printing, and before that was like nanotechnology, et cetera, et cetera. So you know, AI is the new super cool thing. GPT chat is like blowing everyone's mind. I don't know if you saw the thing about the guy who used GPT chat to invent a new language for how slimes would talk.
No, I didn't.
Is like mind blowing. And then some other guy like got GPT chat to like live in, like create its own virtual machine, like computer, and then live within that computer, even though it's inside of a computer, so, which is like also bonkers. So there's some crazy stuff you could do. But you know, who knows? You know, I don't. It's very hard to predict how quickly it'll go, where the rough edges really are, where are the big gaps, and you know, we'll see. But definitely the art that is getting produced from it, and some of the coding assistance that it can do, is pretty awesome. You know, and that's definitely going to be a force multiplier. I think for creativity and for guidance and stuff like that, which is good. I think it just helps. Yeah. You know, like for me, I wear a lot of hats. Like I do a lot of art, animation, and dev, and you know, I've probably written, oh man, hundreds of thousands of like. This one construct in code is called a for loop, where you like look over a set of items. And, you know, I've written that same for loop hundreds of thousands of times. Like if an AI could just, if I could just type for and an AI would just like drop that in there, that'd be great, right? Like those kind of things are just super useful. I don't need to write yet another for loop, right? So there's definitely advantages to things like AI, just like they were to like having a word processor rather than like letter setting, you know, manually, like, you know, like type and stuff, right? So yeah.
Very cool. That's awesome, man. I love the perspective, and man, we're gonna have this conversation regularly so we can touch in on some of these topics as they evolve. That's for sure. So I guess that's a good segue then, because you were at Microsoft for some time, and I don't know the whole history there, so we'll talk through it. But I think as we've touched on, right, kind of the AAA space and gaming industry as it sits today versus the indie space and how games have evolved over time. And you said for a while that you felt that you know, you may not find a place in the gaming industry for you, that you kind of got away from it a little bit. So what does your time at Microsoft look like? What happened there?
Yeah, sure. So I joined Microsoft. I did an internship at Microsoft when I was at school. I went to school up in Canada. Did an internship on a team that doesn't exist anymore, Front Page, and SharePoint. So
Okay.
these are, I don't know if you remember Front Page, but that was a
I
tool
do.
to like help you
Yeah.
build websites.
Yeah.
Like Macromedia Dreamweaver kind of was the competitor. And
I
then,
remember Dreamweaver as well. Yeah.
yeah, and then SharePoint was kind of this like online kind of portal team manager blog thing. Anyway, so that's where I started.
I still use SharePoint in my
Oh,
career
really?
work.
Amazing.
Seriously.
That's
Seriously.
good. That's good.
Yeah.
Very good. So Front Page isn't around anymore,
Right.
but SharePoint's still alive and well, I guess. So yeah, I started there. Back when I was an intern, I was a program manager. So program management is kind of like, I don't know how to, it's not like project manager, it's like it being an interaction designer. Like you would do design work, but you know, Office, which Front Page was part of, was pretty standardized. So you would just kind of like figure out how to use the standard components to build a new experience for users, right? Anyway, so I did that, had a good internship, finished my last year of school, and then joined kind of a researchy team that was backed by Bill Gates and was crazy intimidating. Like there, so many. I remember going into my dev manager's office, and he has a picture on the wall, and it's like 12 guys standing on a hill, and it's like, you know, Bill Gates, like Paul Allen, like all these like hard,
Yeah.
and the dude that's in the office, Greg Wittenberg was his name. So he's like one of the first 12 guys at Microsoft, right? And they would have some very interesting conversations about, like, I knew this one guy, I won't mention his name, but he was installing like a sound room in his like mansion, and he would constantly be yelling at his sound engineer that was working full time on his sound room how like the acoustics weren't perfectly calibrated to whatever his listening experience. And here I am, like this, you know, guy who just came across the country from Canada to this place, Microsoft. I have, you know, just buying my first apartment. So like the delta in terms of like life experience and wages is like astronomical, right? Anyway, so that was fun. I did a lot of like, I started there as a PM. Designers weren't really like a thing initially at Microsoft. Mostly like PMs did it. And then you had like kind of graphical designers that would like do icons and stuff like that. And that was a little bit like, if you think about the nature of like Windows 95, there's not that much design footprint really on it, right? It's kind of like a system that someone built and then you plug into it. But as time went on, I transitioned to be a designer and went through a bunch of different teams. Most of my work was like concepting, V1 stuff. Like I did stuff on Visual Studio. I did a bunch of stuff in like kind of office research area. I did stuff kind of in Azure kind of research stuff. I did stuff in Windows research. I left as a concept architect and did well. Like my job was kind of like to help people think up cool ideas on how to like, you know, make new products and stuff like that. And I learned a lot of good things about design and about, you know, working in a team and all that kind of stuff. I didn't do much game stuff, right? I was really just doing design.
Right.
But around kind of the end of my when I was kind of ending kind of my time at Microsoft released the Windows Phone. And they encouraged people inside of Microsoft to make games for the Windows Phone because, you know, like the employees, most of them understand software and like, hey, can't we kind of inject into the ecosystem software from the different employees? So that was strongly encouraged. And I made a couple different games. I made a game called Akiuk, which is about a penguin who like skates and shoots pucks into hockey nets. And then I made a game called Flying Heads, which is kind of like Fruit Ninja, but you have to like, you're like this dwarven like rifleman and you have to like juggle these zombie heads. And then I made a game called Ninja Boy, which actually made it to like #1 on the phone. So it's like the #1 game or app on the phone. And that was like, oh, okay. You know, I can make something that a lot of people like, even though the Windows Phone is like whatever, 1% of the mobile phone market at the time.
Yeah.
But for the number of people that were on
Still
it,
a lot of people
really like it. Yeah. And that gave me confidence to like say, okay, you know, I can design something that's pretty interesting and design puzzles and cool gameplay and things like that. And after that, I started thinking more and more seriously about, you know, pursuing games as kind of a full-time thing. And so I kind of like finished a big project, which was kind of rethinking Windows so Windows is like, you got the standard one that everyone uses on their PC, and then you have like Enterprise, which are installed on servers.
Yeah.
And there's nothing really in between. So I wanted to really come up with a Windows that was like for professional artists, designers, developers. It was very customizable and things like that. So I spent a lot of time on that. That was a lot of fun. Some of it got used, some of it didn't. But after that, I was like, well, there's not many other projects I can imagine taking on. And so I was like, okay, I want to try something different. And I've always wanted to see what I could do in games. And so Sarah and I, Sarah was running a design consultancy and was getting into textile design and stuff like that. She shuttered that. I left Microsoft. We sold our condo. We traveled a lot and like lived cheap in the early days of Airbnb, where you could like it was really you would literally like a lot of times it would be like, okay, my buddy Frank at the bar has the keys, go get them. And you'd like grab the keys and you walk into someone's house and like all their stuff is there. Like all their clothes are there, all their like stuff's on the walls, they have stuff on the desk, like their kitchen is like all their stuff. And they just trust you to like, not set it on fire or steal it, right? But also you can live really cheap then because no one knew,
Sure.
no one really understood. Like Airbnb wasn't commoditized like it is now, and it wasn't like a management company that runs like has a bunch of things. So we were able to travel and live cheap, and we spent a lot of time just going back to school in a way, like learning how to make games again. We made, I think, about 8 different prototypes. Some of those were like 5 minutes gameplay. Some were like 45 minutes of gameplay.
Okay.
Trying out different ideas, showing them to friends, talking to people that we trusted about them, and just getting better, right? And then eventually kind of came around to Under the End. There was originally going to be like a sci-fi game where you're like this Han Solo character. And I drew this piece of concept art, and it was like super zoomed out and stuff. And we thought, oh, that's going to be awesome. And they were like, oh man, I don't know why I was like, does he have to have a laser sword? And we can't really do that. And they were like, what if he had a real sword? And then kind of went more the Viking route.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And that's kind of how it went from like Microsoft time, where I learned a lot, to like that very risky, like jump and try and give all that up. Cause you have a stable income, you worked really hard to get to this level kind of at Microsoft. Sarah had done really well. We had a great friend group. We bought this great place we really loved, and just kind of like set all that aside and said, hey, let's do this other thing that seems scary, but also super interesting. And, so it's been about 6-7 years now since we've been doing that. I spent 4 years onto 2.5 or so, just kind of learning things. And, a lot of that time of being unsure and uncertain about things informed Under the End, right? Like, what the gameplay is, the experience we're trying to deliver, so on and so forth. So I think it's been amazing. Like, honestly, it's been like, I often think like if I went back and talked to like 13-year-old me shooting hoops at the playground and said, hey, this is what you're going to be doing when you're in your 40s. I'd be like, all right, let's fast forward to that right now. So, yeah.
That's amazing, man. So you mentioned a lot in there that is really interesting. So I'm sure you got to see all kinds of things at Microsoft, especially as Windows Phone comes out and, the smartphone market kind of explodes and Windows is trying to grab a piece of that. We know how that went. And, all kinds of technology kind of came and went in that decade. So if I've got this right, so you left Microsoft sometime, 2014, 2015? So
what is it, 2022 now? It would have been like 2017 as 2016. I can't remember. 2016, I think, was kind of when I ended. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And then, wow. Yeah, that is a leap of faith right there. And I mean, I think it's one, I admire that because, the way you kind of described your life is where, my wife and I both have long careers now, company and comfortable and, all those things and thinking about pushing that aside and just trying something brand new and hoping it works is a scary thought. It's a scary thing to do.
Very scary. And it was kind of like, I don't know. I guess we weren't like, we love games. Sarah likes games. I play them more, but it wasn't for this like amazing, it sounds weird to say, but it wasn't because we were like, felt like this really strong desire to make games, but we did feel we wanted to make something and really like make something that was ours. And kind of like take a challenge and take a risk. And yeah, it was more instinctual than really well thought out, I would say. Just felt like that's like something to do. And I'd be lying if I said that we never looked back or we never thought like, wow, that was dumb. Like we definitely like said like, well, maybe we shouldn't have done this, like maybe we had it pretty good before. But all in all, we're really happy with the kind of the decisions we made and where we're at and stuff. So yeah, I don't know. For me, that kind of makes life interesting, and I don't want to look back and think like, when I can't make things anymore, that I wish I would have taken that chance. I want to be able to say like, yeah, we took a risk, and this is what came of it, and this is what we did, and this is what we learned and stuff. So, yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. So, I think so Until the End comes out last year.
No, like 2020, it comes out.
It's been that long.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it's almost 2 years. So it's the 15th today. It came out December 9th, same day as Cyberpunk 2020.
That's right. Oh, that's right. Yes. Okay. All right. So I wasn't too far off, a month.
Yeah. No, no.
I was gonna say I thought it was early last year, but okay. And I kind of want to ask you about that. So, what is that? You know, you make this huge leap in your personal life and your career for both of
Right.
you, which is a whole nother factor too, right? Because when you're married and you rely on one
Oh, yeah.
another for income and everything that you do in your life, if one person wants to take a leap, that's already scary enough. But the fact that you left together is both awesome and amazing. Um, so you do this and you obviously, you know, you work, I'm sure, extremely hard prototyping and kind of coming up,
Oh,
as
yeah.
you said, with this idea and going through, and we'll talk a little more about that. But as this game, actually, let's talk about that first before it releases. So the process of making this game and the trial and error and the I'm sure the challenges and complications and unexpected walls that you hit along the way. How was that? How was spending 4 years making a game that's going to go out to the large public and Xbox and everything? You know, how with your wife? How was that process?
I mean, that's probably a whole other podcast, to be honest. But
Sure,
yeah, I
sure,
mean, it was everything you probably imagine it would be in terms of some really, really high highs and then some like low lows, right?
yeah,
So one thing that I think is unique about making a game with your spouse is that, you know, when you work at a job, at least when I worked at a job, it's like I have the job and I have a circle of people around me at the job that I interact with, and then I come home to like friends and family, right? And there's like this separation of concerns there. So I can
yep,
talk to Sarah about like, oh, you know, this went poorly or that went well or whatever, and that's very
sure,
cathartic, right? It helps it kind of anchor you like psychologically, right? But when it's
right,
just Sarah and I working on something, it's like that's it, right? It's like everything is the game, and like I can't like complain to Sarah about Sarah, and she can't play to me about me. There's no other kind of backstop. And then to kind of double down on that, we were traveling, right? So we're often in places where we don't know one other person in the whole country. We barely like speak the language. We're like in Chile or Argentina, or we spent some time in France and stuff like that. And we don't really know where the heck we are. And you kind of like get there and figure out where to get food, and that's about it. And then you kind
right,
of work and stuff. So you don't have the friends and family to fall back on. So that's challenging, but it was also fantastic because it really brought Sarah and I closer together.
sure,
I think we're much better for it. We're much better partners, both in terms of like life and relationship, but also as kind of work partners. We now can work through things and exchange ideas with each other much quicker, much faster than we ever could before, and much better than I could have with any other kind of workmate. So that's great, but it takes a lot of time, and you question yourself, we doing the right thing, et cetera, and
yeah,
then we consciously made a decision to not make a 2D Dark Souls, right? A lot of people see it as a 2D Dark Souls because it kind of shares some of the sentimentality of Dark Souls in terms of the mood and the tone and the
right,
unforgiving nature. But the combat system is different. The idea that you can get past every encounter without fighting is pretty different. And kind of the general pacing of it. There's no dialogue. There's no upgrading your character is pretty different. But that's also super risky because you're like, what are we doing here? Is this going to resonate with people, right? So
yeah,
it wasn't
yeah,
really until like Gamescom, when was that? 2017, maybe. That was the first time we came out publicly and showed it to anybody. Now that was only journalists we were showing it to.
sure,
But people really responded very positively to it. Actually, like Rock Paper Shotgun, the journalist's name was Matt Castle. He played it. He gave the little demo. We get it 9 out of 10, and only Sekiro like did better in his mind at Gamescom,
awesome,
right? So I was like, okay, we're really onto something here. Like we have something cool. All the risks we took in terms of like the pacing and the combat and stuff like that. It lands with people, not everyone, but enough people. And then we kind of use that as a springboard to move forward.
yeah,
And so like we did Steam Fest, which went really well. We did EGX that people really liked. And so we were pretty confident going into the release of the game. I would say like we knew what it was and wasn't. Having Xbox kind of reach out and support us was great. That felt, like someone else that had done lots of games, like believed in us. So that was good. I mean, but there's always fear, right? They're like testing unto the end and getting it finished was a nightmare, right? There was so
oh, I
many
can't imagine, yeah,
tests. There's like over 100 decisions you can make in the game. Every single encounter can be passed multiple ways. There's all sorts of ways to break the thing. I was very proud of how robust and stable it was and how bug free it was. But that took a ton of effort, right? It was a lot of work. Porting at the end was a lot of work, really, really a nightmare. A lot of things went poorly there. Many of those weren't in our control. There were some struggles there. And there's other things that went poorly that I can't really talk about right now. But there was definitely a lot of challenges, and getting it out to people. And the reaction has been mixed and polarizing in many ways, right? Some people absolutely love the game, and some people hate it. Like, we actually have a quote on our website. Is the one guy's like, hot garbage, please don't play, is the quote about it. It's alongside of a lot of other positive quotes, but that it shows how some people reacted to it. And I think that, to circle back to our, what we talked about, at the beginning of our chat, some people really just had the mindset like, it's Dark Souls, but it's 2D. And if it didn't fit that mindset, it's like, okay, this must be designed by a bunch of idiots. And, they may very well be right that maybe it was, but we very intentionally designed all the things. And I think the greatest challenge for game designers nowadays that want to do something different is to do that level setting, right? How do you get the player to be in the right mindset to, fully enjoy your experience? And that's something I think we've learned a bit about, but, have still not kind of mastered in any way. So.
Sure. Yeah, that's wild, man. I was going to ask you, speaking of kind of quotes and as you start to get the game out there in the wild and see how people react to it, which I'm sure is nerve wracking.
Sure. Yeah.
Like crazy.
Oh, super stressful. Like it's like, it's one of the most stressful things ever when you're watching someone else play your game. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I can imagine. Like, having met a lot of people who cover games and stuff, there, as with any group of people, right, there's a huge dichotomy of personalities and just everything that goes into it. And I think, to your point, there's going to be some people who are more ingrained or maybe seasoned, I'll use here at Season Gaming, who, maybe would have had a little more patience in figuring things out, whereas others may have expected something else. And I'm sure the reactions you got were, all over the place. Let me ask you, as the game releases, right, and it's launching December 9th, 2020. This is our date. Got this small little game called Cyberpunk also releasing on the same day, which that's its own story at this point. But as you sit back and the game releases and the reviews start coming in, what was your and Sarah's mindset at that point? Were you kind of well, you can tell me, but I could imagine it would be a mixture of like, obviously happiness that you've made it to this point and your game's releasing and people are going to get to experience it. But I can also imagine the opposite, which is pure just terror of so many, people getting ready to play your game and what they may think of it and the response that you're going to get.
Right. It's scary for sure. Like, like the Rock Paper Shotgun reviewer, which I respect the heck out of Rock Paper Shotgun. It's probably one of my favorite, game magazines. Like, she hated the game. She actually wrote, "I hate this game," but she was very kind about it. Like, it has beautiful art, beautiful animation, it's well paced, blah, blah, blah. But personally, she hated it. So that was hard. That was a hard pill to swallow. I was like, oh man, that really sucks. Now, there were other people in Rock Paper Shotgun, Catherine Castle, who's now the editor of Rock Paper Shotgun. And she came out on Twitter and she's like, "Oh, this game is amazing. Like, it's an incredible accomplishment. You have to play it. It's fantastic." And so that, that kind of like takes you to the other extreme. You're like, "Oh man, that's right. We're on the top of the world." So it was a lot of these highs and lows, right?
Sure.
In terms of like what you're going through. As I said, we had like tens of thousands of people through the game before it actually got out there, right? Via the various demos and stuff like that. We talked to a lot of people. We'd had gone to enough conferences. So we kind of knew we felt pretty confident in terms of like, how the reaction would be. Nothing really prepares you for, when you get it out to the definitely the world of like Game Pass, for example, which is millions of players that are coming to your game with like, "Oh, that looks cool. I'll try it," because it's free, And so there's no like, it's very like they're just coming in with no setup, no expectations, not even maybe looking for kind of a cinematic combat platform. They're just like, "Hey, that art looks cool. Let's play it." And so those reactions are I don't know. It's like watching your kid. I don't know. I don't have kids, but it's when I watch friends that are like, nieces that play sports and stuff, you don't want them to succeed, right? It's very similar to that.
Right.
And you can't do anything about it. You can't make them shoot, the ball in the net or like skate well. You just can will them to do these things. But that's it, right? And everything else kind of has to go on its own. So, yeah, that was it. You summed it up, right? It was super, super terrifying, but also like incredibly satisfying when you see someone react the way you hope people would react, right?
Sure. It's got to be like sheer elation
amazing.
that,
yeah,
you created and put so much blood, sweat, and tears into something that someone's really enjoying, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
Now I know that there's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I always find it fascinating, and there's way too much speculation about it. And I know obviously per contracts there's certain things you can't say, but you can at least give me a general sense of your experience with Game Pass. You mentioned Game Pass, and we've heard from other developers who are more vocal than others about their experience with Xbox and kind of putting their game on Game Pass and what that either helped or hurt or what have you. How was it for you?
I mean, Game Pass was fantastic in that it allowed many, many more people to see the game with zero barrier to entry than they would have otherwise. I don't know, commercially, like that's maybe a harder conversation to have. I don't have all the details actually to even be able to intelligently talk about that, which is another conversation, but I can't really get into that. I think that the guys at Game Pass, like the people we worked with, were awesome. Like Nick Zukelich, Chris Charla, Tao Silva, like Gersh Pazer. Those guys were fantastic. Guys who love games, like want games to succeed, really care about gaming. That was really awesome. And so, overall, it was a really great experience. I think that, I still am reflecting on, like, is it the best thing to do financially and all that kind of stuff? That's a harder conversation. And it's also one you can't really answer, right? Because unless you have like a Wayback Machine where you can like try out two different alternate realities, you'll never know the answer, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of a gamble either way, I'm sure.
What's that?
Yeah. I said it would seem to me it's kind of a gamble. You have to kind of weigh the pros and cons and, financially where you think your game's going to land in a sales perspective without it or with it. And
it's very hard to predict. And it's so, that kind of calculus can kind of like turn your brain inside out. So, like I like to focus on the, Unto the End would have been a different experience to build without the support of Xbox, because that kind of gives you confidence and bolsters you. Like we'll see like what if we go that route again for the next one too. If we decide to kind of go that route for future games, it'll just depend on all sorts of factors that I don't even really know about right now. Right? It's like every kind of situation is different. So overall, love Game Pass. Really enjoyed working with those guys, and really had a good experience with Xbox and Microsoft. Definitely.
Good. That's good to hear. Yeah, I do find it interesting, and I'm an analyst at heart, and you talked about program management earlier in that, and so when you have those decades of experience in those spaces, I just tend to think about these things, like and run the numbers in my head, and I can again kind of imagine what it was like for you to run through those things and to kill yourself overthinking what it would be one way or another.
Right.
So I just find it fascinating. And I always love reading about those experiences. So, well, that's cool. I did want to ask you, you also launched on Stadia.
Yes.
And Stadia has been its own thing. Many of us have talked extensively about Google's plans, and obviously with the announcement recently, earlier this year, they shut down first party development. And then now, obviously, a couple months ago, they announced that they're basically shuttering Stadia entirely. What are your thoughts, not necessarily on Stadia or Google as a whole? That's a big conversation, but, how was your personal experience with launching on Stadia? Was that something that was easy to do? And are you surprised, or, what are your thoughts on Google kind of just getting away from it entirely now?
Yeah. I mean, we had a porting team do the actual port to Stadia.
Okay.
It was fairly painless in that the delta between making a PC game and then effectively Stadia is like a Linux game is not as big as like making a PC game to like doing an Xbox, or Switch version of the game. So the port was pretty painless. Stadia, they were just getting started, right? Like we were one of the first indie games on there.
Yeah.
So there was some definitely, the obvious growing pains in terms of support and documentation and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't really have any strong feelings either way about like how the Stadia experience went. I can't talk a ton about the intricacies of like what it meant to ship on Stadia for all sorts of good reasons. Um, I think that Stadia was a very interesting idea technologically, but I don't know. I've it's been hard for me to figure out, like for folks like you and I, if I have a PlayStation or an Xbox and I can get games on that, I want to play at that. I want to play at the most highest graphics settings, the best frame rates, lowest latency, all that kind of stuff. Stadia seemed to be able to, well, their kind of philosophy and vision kind of had a bunch of different kind of forms, right? Like when it first came out, it was kind of this friction-free, hey, you watch a video immediately, you're playing the game, you step up from your computer, you're playing it on your phone. I don't know if did that ever really manifest? I don't know if they ever really realized that.
I wouldn't say fully. No.
Yeah. So that, then they kind of switched to be like, okay, well, if you can't get your hands on a console or a decent gaming machine, then we'll be your replacement. And actually, kind of to tie it back to the Cyberpunk thing, I think Cyberpunk ran best on Stadia day one.
It did for a time, yes.
Better than any of the other, platforms, right? So filling that niche is brilliant. But if you look at the demographics, like how many people are out there that can't afford, I don't know what a PS is nowadays, $600 PlayStation or something, but have internet that's fast enough to play Stadia. I think that's a very small number of people that are in that window. And so if that's their addressable user base, maybe it's not big enough to really support, the platform. But I do know that, or I suspect that, a lot of very bright people built some really cool technology there.
Yes.
And I would hope that technology gets used for other things. Maybe it's not gaming, maybe it's like video streaming or something, that's somewhat related. But I've kind of felt bad for Stadia because I think they had some really great ideas. I think that like any console or platform or whatever, you need to have amazing titles on it. And if you don't have killer titles, all the tech in the world isn't really going to matter. It's unclear if they had those killer titles. And unfortunately, their vision changed, and that's hard for people to handle because they come into it like it's going to be this one thing. And then if it's this other thing, then there's this mismatch, and that's hard to overcome. So that's kind of an unfortunate set of circumstances for them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to hear, but that's kind of what I figured in terms of porting your game to them. And I've heard from, or read, I should say, other developers talk about it. I was just kind of curious about that because I think one of the biggest, well, you can tell me, but it seems like one of the probably biggest challenges, especially for smaller studios with getting their game in front of more people today, is kind of getting it to the different platforms and making sure it runs properly and there's no specific bugs. And I would imagine that in and of itself is a pretty big challenge, right? And as you decide, the more platforms you decide to launch on, the larger that challenge is.
Yeah, it definitely is a challenge to, testing a game on all the different pieces of hardware and getting it to perform well enough on all those things is a lot of work. A lot of that in the industry is you have porting studios that are dedicated to that. Yeah. Right. So they specialize in like taking PC code and putting it on Xbox or whatever. And so that makes the experience easier because those guys have done it, dozens of times or hundreds of times. Excuse me. The real challenge is in testing, make sure the quality's there, all that kind of stuff. And that, that's kind of more of a human thing, right? Where you have to be able to sit in front of the thing and test it and play it and have an eye for detail. And that's kind of hard to teach and hard to know. And so Sarah and I ended up doing a lot of that ourselves. And that just takes a ton of time, right?
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. So now we're about to hit 2023.
Right.
Two Ton Studios has your first kind of full game well under the belt now. A couple years are coming up on. A couple years. And I'm sure that you guys are working on what's next, or have some plans and thoughts and everything else. So obviously, no world premiere here today. Right. But what are you guys kind of thinking for the future? What are you working on? What are you talking about? What can we expect to see from you down the line?
Sure. Yeah. No, we have a couple projects on the go. Some are more experimental than others. We
Okay.
kind of have like a main game that we're focusing on that Sarah's driving a lot of. That is very much kind of like takes the ideas and sentiment of Unto the End and kind of like it goes forward with those things.
Okay.
The setting is very different, and the gameplay is pretty different. So it's not a bearded dude with a sword. I can tell you that.
Okay.
And then like after Unto, I was really excited and really kind of humbled by people that kind of come out of the woodwork and say, hey, I played your game, like I love it, let's keep chatting, kind of thing. And so I've met a lot of people that I really admire and look up to in the industry.
Excellent.
And that's helped, both in terms of getting access to those guys, being able to talk to them, learn from them. And so that is something that we've internalized and are kind of applying to kind of future projects. I have a project that is a big part of my focus right now, which is kind of related to gaming, but isn't a game.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to do some stuff there. I can't really talk. This is all very general. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
it's fine. It's fine.
But
no.
Yeah, so we're super busy. We've learned a lot from shipping Unto the End about the industry, about the people in the industry, about making games, about gamers, we think. And we have our fingers in a number of pies, you could say.
Sure.
And I hope we'll be able to talk about some of those things in 2023. That's kind of the plan.
Awesome.
But it's always hard to tell, right, with these things.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that's cool. I'll hopefully welcome you back when you are ready to speak about
No,
those
I'd love
things
that.
and can help to get that message back.
Awesome.
So you mentioned you've learned a lot about the gaming industry. I want to put you on the spot for one question,
Sure.
and it's not really on the spot, but sitting where I sit and I sit in this weird line between, I'm certainly not in the gaming industry. I'm not a game developer. I'm very open about that, but I do work in application development and I have experience testing and coding and all those things. So I understand aspects of it. Right.
Sure.
Now that you've gotten your game out there and there's, you've had this experience with reviewers and Game Pass and all these gamers playing your game, and you listen to people like me blabber on sometimes, maybe most times incorrectly, about how things work. What would you say is the thing that most either outlets, podcasts, what have you, the biggest misconception about how the gaming industry works?
So the gaming industry all up. I mean, I don't know if I even have enough experience to answer that. I could kind of, I mean, I could try and take a stab at that. The gaming industry, it's led by a small number of studios that make very big, high-profile games, and those studios, rightfully, I would think, garner most of the attention, and that attention drives eyeballs to the different locations and sites and things like that. And some of those sites handle that better than others, right?
Yes.
And I think some of them are influenced, and there's kind of this concept of earned media and earned marketing that I'm not sure how I feel about it, because it's just because you have a big game and you spend a lot of money on it and you made a couple games before, I don't necessarily think that should give you a pass for future titles, right? Like I think in order for the game industry to move forward, critical feedback and reviewing and actively participating and trying to make the industry better, whatever better means, and it means something different for everyone, is an important thing that I think every journalist and reviewer and outlet and stuff should do. So I think that that's kind of how it moves. And then there's indies that are fitting in there, and they're trying to pop into these niches and kind of grab some of that limelight. And you see games like a Hollow Knight that is does astronomically well. And for every Hollow Knight, you have tens of thousands of games that do don't even do a percent of 1% of their success. And so that's an unfortunate thing. But that's true everywhere, right? Like that's just how it is, right? Like I can't tell you how many amazingly talented musicians I know that will never be on the radio, right? And that's just how it is. And so you got to be okay with that. And the way I try to look at it is, and Sarah too, it's like we love the journey, right? And we love crafting games, and we love trying to express ourselves through games. And for us, it's very much an art first experience, in the truest sense of art, not just in the drawing. And as long as we're happy with the things and we feel we got something out of it, how it does is kind of a secondary thing. Of course, we want to do well because we want to make more games and we want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
But we don't do it, first and foremost to make money, right? We do it first and foremost to deliver experiences that we would like to play and we hope other people will play. Not the whole industry doesn't work like that. There definitely are games out there that are built 100% to make money, and there are many game designers out there that think about, okay, there's this niche and there's this addressable market, and I'm going to go do this thing and I'm going to capitalize on it this way. And that's not a judgment statement. That's just how it is, right? Like, there's no right or wrong way to do it, but that's just how Sarah and I kind of approach it.
I love it, man. Genuinely. And I mean, it's part of why we're having this conversation, right? Is because I appreciate, the way conversation we had previously and, your approach to the industry. And I think a lot of what we've talked about today is what is the big reason why I love gaming to begin with and why it fascinated me, and always has really. So no, that's great perspective. And I wish you and Sarah all the best on your next project. I'm really looking forward to it. And whenever it does come time to speak about it, I will be happy to sit down with you and help get the word out. Because
thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Of course.
Yeah. And the work you do covering things, sharing your opinions openly, not without bias, that's rare and that's essential for gaming to do well. And so, I appreciate, guys like you, guys like, Cog and those guys that, do their thing. That's essential stuff. And, gaming would be much worse, if folks like yourself didn't exist. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that, Stephen. So, well, great, man. I've genuinely, it's been a little while since I've done one of these, but even despite that, I will say genuinely, this has been one of the most enjoyable gaming conversations I've had in some time. It's just the perspective that someone like you can offer, both from development and the industry, and kind of just the journey you've had to where you are today is always fascinating to me, and I love talking about that kind of stuff. So thank you for agreeing to sit down with me, and it certainly will not be the last time.
Awesome, thanks, man. Yeah, really appreciate it. Had a lot of fun. Enjoy the holidays.
You as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Look forward to doing it again. Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll circle back in 2023. On our way out here, is there anything you want to say about Two Ton Unto the End? Anything else to the audience?
No, I mean, if you feel like a challenging kind of game about a father that is really an intruder, kind of traipsing through lands he doesn't understand, and you're cool with kind of trying to embrace the ideas of the father feeling alone and lost and unsure, then give Unto a try. But most importantly, check out indie games. Don't just look at the big AAA games. Go to sites like Rock Paper Shotgun. They do a great job of covering lesser known games. Check them out, support them. There's a lot that is out there for gaming, and the more you can experience that, I think it's going to make you more interested in gaming, and then maybe make it inspire you to make your own games, which I'd love to see and play. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. As always, we will continue to do more of these. We've got more of these lined up for 2023, and we'll get back to a regular cadence of speaking with people across the industry. But as always, stay tuned, Season Gaming, and thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Cheers.